Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the extra mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now your hosts, Jackson Mummy and Megan Saya from Celebration Bar Review.
Megan, if you're there, why don't I ask you to jump in? Hey, how are you?
Hi, good. How are you doing?
Good. So you heard me talking about group coaching and letting the group coaches get their equilibrium back. I think that was true for you and me too, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. It was really nice to breathe a sigh of relief. And I know for the students as well who took February to be able to say, oh my goodness, come what may, at least I know there's not another bar exam in a month and a half. So,
unless you're in Texas and there's one in 2 weeks. So
yeah.
That's strange. But yeah, I think for everyone, this is a time now to get back to a more normal, whatever this new normal is, but to have a little bit of time off. And if you took the exam in February of 2021, we hope your results are favorable. We're going to talk about the exams in a bunch of different jurisdictions today. The feedback we got uniformly across all these jurisdictions was very positive from our students. But inevitably, some people will not pass. And if you're one of those people who did not pass, whether it's in our course or if you're listening to this later on the podcast and you did not pass, there will be enough time to prepare for the July exams. And that was not the case in the fall. Those results came out and there was not enough time to refocus for February of 2021. So we're back to something that looks more normal, I think. And that's good news, right? I think it's just tough. And I know we've got probably some people on the call with us today who took the February exams, probably want to hear what we've got to say about the tests. But I want to just say to you all who took the test, first of all, congratulations. You are real superstars for going in there and taking the test. I think we will see lower numbers of applicants across the board, every jurisdiction for this exam, probably the lowest February applicant numbers that we will have seen in years and years. And I think for those who took the test, you deserve special congratulations for just hanging in there, doing it, and making it happen. And now what you want to do is take the next month or 6 weeks and just get back to normal. Let your body and your brain relax. Because that's a thing, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Even if it turns out that you weren't successful on this exam, there's no need, if you just took the February exam, to hop right back into studying. Definitely, even if you're feeling, oh, I don't think that was enough. I don't think I did enough to put me over the line. Definitely still take the time to relax, reset, remember that there's a world outside of bar study.
Really?
Yeah, doesn't feel like it at the moment, maybe, but at least for those of us who are under 65 and are at the back of the line for vaccines. But yes, I think it's really important to celebrate what you did, and even just being able to take the exam, finishing it is a huge accomplishment. And then certainly given all of the stressors and craziness that's happening right now, if you were someone who managed to be able to take the February test, like, great job. Like, that's amazing. That your perseverance and hard work is something to celebrate in and of itself.
I definitely think it is. And give yourself some grace here. I think that's really our message, is that you've been going hard. Some of you I know have been going really hard for over a year. And it takes a toll. There we go. All right. So with that having been said, where we want to go here on our tour of the February 21 exam?
First, let's talk through the subjects that we can talk about and what was on the exam for the various jurisdictions.
Okay. So I want to start by saying that under our licensing agreement with the National Conference of Bar Examiners, the people that write the uniform bar exam, we are not permitted to tell you the subjects, even though we know them, of those essays or the specifics of the performance tests. We will withhold that information publicly until probably sometime in mid-May. So unfortunately, that's the reality. But in California, Georgia, and Florida, we can talk about what was tested, and we can give you some broad outlines of what happened in the UBE. I think we'll start with California. Let's do that. California is always a big state. And one of the things that we do is to debrief with our students afterwards and talk to them as they're coming out of the exams in the few days afterwards. And it's always fascinating to hear what people have to say. We got a high degree of consensus in all of the jurisdictions. Sometimes after an exam, we get people say, well, it was this kind of essay, and oh, it was that. And we're like, I don't know. But we didn't have that here in any jurisdiction. So I feel pretty confident that what we're describing to you is accurate. If you think it's something different, by all means, let us know.
Mhm.
We've certainly not seen the questions anywhere, but this is what's being reported to us. So in California, there are 5 one-hour essays and then one 90-minute performance test. The essays in California, and this is in no particular order, just as I'm going through them, there was an evidence essay. And I will say I'm not clear as to whether or not that was California-specific evidence or model rules. Nobody told me one way or the other specifically, but I think that we'll see. It was an evidence essay. We'll leave it at that. The next essay was contracts, and it had a particular emphasis on UCC Article 2, which is interesting. Sometimes you can get into common law contracts. This was UCC contracts, and it was different than a remedies question. This was a contracts question, and that was interesting to me. The examiners have liked the subject of contracts a lot, but they've tested it most recently with remedies. So I thought this was interesting that they stayed away from remedies. The next subject that I thought was likely to be on the exam, I'm feeling pretty good about my ability to discern what's going to happen, was community property. And community property to me is just an easy subject. So I'm always glad when I see community property. Woo-hoo! How tough is it? Wife gets this, husband gets this. Remember the rules and you're good. Next essay, again, one that we fully expected and told our students to be prepared for, was professional responsibility. As I understand it, as they've been doing, it was both answer under both California and American Bar Association rules. Even though this subject is now called California ethics or California professional responsibility, the last few exams have all been California and ABA together, and they did that again this time. So that seems to be the way that the examiners are testing that subject. And then the last of the topics was real property. And I thought that that was an interesting subject. I'm just looking to see what I had written about real property, if I can find it. And there we go. That was one that I honestly thought was not all that likely, but it showed up. So other than that, I was pretty much spot on with everything. I just want to say, I pretty much called the rest of the exam. But property, it's been this way my whole life. I just property avoidant. I don't think about it. So there you go.
Wishful thinking that it would.
Wishful thinking. That's what it was. It was wishful thinking. The performance test was an objective task to a legal audience. It was writing a memo. Again, pretty much what we expected. The feedback that I heard from California students was pretty straightforward test, not a lot of twists and turns, not a lot of difficulty, not an overwhelming exam. Is that a fair recap of what you heard?
Yeah, definitely. I don't think there really were any big surprises. And certainly, I hope that people take note with the performance test. I know we say this a lot, that objective memo to a legal audience is they just love it. They love writing those. And when you're practicing those performance tests, if you're a July student, practice the persuasive legal audience and the objective legal audience. It's just the memos, motions for the court, things like that. It's just, they love to test those. Obviously, they're great, a great way. You're not super likely to see draft an HOA contract. You're just much more likely to see these sort of tasks that are more of what first-year associates tend to do in a law firm.
Yeah. Our California students, I think, felt pretty good. We're going to talk a little bit about the online logistics later, right?
Yeah.
But in terms of subject matter, felt like a pretty good test. We'll also talk about multi-state later. After we finish all these states, I'll go back and talk about multi-state a little bit. But that's what we heard in California. Where do we want to go next? Georgia? Can we do
Sure.
that? Okay. So Georgia, for those of you that don't know, very different kind of exam. They, without getting too much in the weeds, in fall of 2020, they gave 3 30-minute essays that were open book. This time they went to 4 45-minute essays, but again, open book. And that's really interesting. I think they were the only major jurisdiction in February of 2021 to be in an open book format. We got good feedback from people about the open book nature of it and the ability to use mind maps in particular. A lot of folks really appreciated that they were doing mind maps and that worked well for them, and they felt pretty comfortable with all of that. In terms of the subject matter that was being tested, I hate to say this, but there was real property again. And I was ambivalent about real property in Georgia. I didn't say it was not likely, but I weaseled out on it. And pretty straightforward, real property question. And then the next subject I did think was going to be there, and that was Georgia civil procedure. I thought that either Georgia or federal civil procedure were likely. It turned out to be Georgia civil procedure. That has been a trend there. And I think civil procedure is just something the examiners like to test a lot on this exam in this jurisdiction. The third of the 4 essays I also thought was very likely, and that was in torts. So I feel good about that. My real property was but torts, I was there. I was on it. I thought torts was coming, and so I feel good about that. But then the last subject was wills and estates. Are you kidding me? I did not expect that on the exam necessarily, but there we had it. It was there. And I didn't get a lot of feedback out of Georgia students that was like, oh my God, these were crazy, impossible questions, way too long, which the examiners like to do. But I thought it was also interesting how people really have learned how to use the open book exam. We talked before the fall exam about don't bring your books with you, don't bring pages of notes, bring mind maps. Mm-hmm. And that seemed to resonate with people. It worked. We had great success with our Georgia students in 2020. And I thought that this crop of students seemed to have learned from that there was a much more effective use, maybe because they had the extra 15 minutes. Do you think that made a difference?
Yes. I was just going to say that the feedback that we got from Georgia students back in 2020, in late 2020, was that even though the essays had gone down to 30 minutes, they didn't seem to have any fewer calls of the question. Georgia students were really rushed with the essays, with the 30 minutes. Now, obviously, part of that too is these are a lot of people who'd been practicing the 45 minutes, and then the switch was made and they had to change and adjust and do the 30 minutes. That it is difficult, right? If you just trained your brain, this is what it feels like to write an essay in this amount of time, and then you have to dial it down 15 minutes. That's very difficult. So I think going back to the 45 minutes, keeping the open book, allowing people to use their mind maps meant that they had a little bit more breathing room and were able to really use, although like you said, we had a lot of Georgia students pass in 2020. I am really hopeful for the ones who just took this last exam, because I think they had the benefits of the last one with being able to use the mind maps, but they weren't handicapped by the 15 fewer minutes for each essay.
Yeah, I thought with that extra 15 minutes, you could really use your mind map and really dig in and go for it. And that's the feedback that I got from people. So if you're taking the Georgia bar exam for July of 2021, we don't know yet if it's going to be an open book exam, but I would work under the assumption that it is. And I would be building mind maps like crazy. I would do that in any jurisdiction. You're just nuts if you're not using a mind map, because it's really the most efficient way to bring your notes into the room by far. So that was good. Now, Georgia also gives 2 performance tests, the Multistate performance test. And because it's written by the National Conference, I have to be careful about what I say about it. But I can tell you this. One of the performance tests was an objective task. The other was a persuasive task, and they were both to legal audiences. So this is what we expect on the performance tests. One of each of those, as you said, Megan, no drafting questions, no persuasive tasks to non-legal audiences. So this is the normal structure that we're seeing over and over again: objective, legal, persuasive, legal. So you're writing a memo, you're drafting a brief to the court, something of that nature. Now, we're not going to get into the specifics of the topics that were discussed in those performance tests, but I do want to talk for a minute about performance tests. We had them in California, we had them in Georgia, we had them in the UBE. It is really continued to be a big challenge for people to write a performance test online. Did you get that reaction from folks?
I think it's the hardest part about switching to the online test, because when you think about it, the MBE, really not a big deal. Obviously, you just flag, they have a mechanism, you can flag any questions, you click the answer, not a big deal. The typing for the essay portion, you already were typing it online. It's really not that big of a switch. The questions are pretty short. It's not so terribly difficult to do it without underlining or writing in the margins. But for the performance test, those things are so long and the text boxes are so small. And that was a lot of feedback that I heard from people, which we'll talk as we get into the tech portion and how to take it online. But this is the message to the July students. Please, I'm begging you, practice your performance tests online right now, like from day one. Don't even bother doing a performance test in the book if you are in a jurisdiction that's going to be online. If your jurisdiction is going to be online, so if you're a California student, it is worthless to write a performance test like with your book out, taking notes in the margins, underlining, etc. Don't do it. It's literally not going to help you. You need to do it completely on your computer. And yes, it's going to be awkward and uncomfortable, but I really need you to work out those kinks now and not when we get till June and you're like, oh, I guess maybe now I should switch over. You're going to regret it. So please, if you're in an online jurisdiction, you need to start writing the performance test from day one online, even though it's really not an ideal situation.
And in our course, we've got a video specifically about doing performance tests online. We also have a video specifically about writing essays online, and we have a video specifically about taking multiple choice questions online. So those tools are all there. I would also say, if you are struggling with this writing online, look at the possibility of adding some coaching calls, either on an hourly basis or upgrading your course to get that coaching, because I found that the people that I worked with and that you worked with, Megan, were far more adept at making this transition to things like writing the performance test online than the people who were trying to figure it out on their own. It's just hard to do. And it's hard to get a sense of, am I doing enough? Is the answer long enough? Am I using my time properly? And so on. Even though we walk you through step by step, it's really good to have someone coaching you through that. And also probably from an accountability standpoint, don't you think? Just having to do it. Yeah. It's not fun to do. Yeah. I don't know many people go, wow, this morning I get to write a performance test. It's a big part of the exam. And I think Megan's advice is really good. Those online and get underway with that right from the beginning. That's what we heard in Georgia. And we'll see what Georgia decides to do. I don't know what their exam release date is there. And I forgot to mention this. California will release results sometime mid-May. They didn't give an exact date. Georgia, I think, would be in about that same time frame, mid-May, sometimes later. They've actually been one of the later ones, haven't they, to give results out?
Yeah, they have. Nope. So what about Florida subjects?
Okay, so let me start with the result date, which will be April 12th in Florida. Florida was thank God, finally a more predictable regular exam. It was a regular 2-day test instead of that crazy hybrid we had in October. And I thought it was certainly an interesting exam. Let's talk about the essays first. The examiners, as they often do, had some crossovers. The first question was domestic relations with a crossover to professional responsibility or ethics. We certainly thought that ethics was going to be there. And I called the family law question. I flat out called it. I just said, that's where you're going. We're coming in on that. I thought they were ready for it. And there it was. Felt really good about that. So that was the first question, domestic relations with ethics as the crossover. The second essay also had a professional responsibility crossover. Again, pretty much what we said to people. You could look for 1, 2, or even 3 questions with ethics or professionalism in them. This time there were 2. And then the examiners did what I thought might happen, and that is they took trusts, the very strange subject of trust, and they made it into the essay. Now, for context and history, in October of 2020, completely out of the blue, never before done, never before seen, the examiners tested trust as a multiple choice topic. Nobody saw that coming, including me, but they did it. So this time I said, I think they're going to test trust again in either multiple choice or essay. And sure enough, they did. Now, I thought they were more likely to go back to multiple choice, but they did not. They put it into an essay, which raises the interesting question about where does trust go from here? I don't know the answer. Will it be tested as essays or multiple choice or both? Or I don't know. Anyway, you should know trust law. I think that's the answer. You got to know trust law. And then the examiners did what I thought was truly a Florida thing. They went to federal constitutional law for the final essay. And I have been saying for some time that no bar examiner in their right mind should want to be testing federal con law. It's a completely insane subject. But in Florida, and I'm going to catch some heat for this, but Florida seems to be just determined to politicize the bar exam.
Yeah.
And these federal con law questions are a great way to do it. There have been some straw man questions that got into abortion rights, and there were some real trigger questions around rape and some other things that they have done. This time, the federal con law question was about a congressional statute that required all 34-year-old males to pass a test before they could get some kind of a license, a click it or ticket kind of thing. And again, it seems to be stalking horse for other things. They just seem to want to be at the most controversial points of constitutional law. And I don't know, that's got to be the essay writer just seems to be excited about that stuff and to do that. And I thought that was, again, just one of those weird topics that they tested. How many new lawyers are going to have to deal with constitutional hypotheticals in which there's a federal mandate to removing money to the state? I don't know. Does that strike you as weird? Or is it just me?
Yeah, no, I think it's something that we consistently hear from Florida takers is that, oh, it's so weird. There was at least like this one essay that just took me out of the exam because it felt like it was very political or very, right, like
Yeah.
they felt like the writer seemed to have an agenda with what they were saying. And so it took them out of the exam because you felt like, gosh, I want to pass the bar, but I also like don't really agree with the premise of this question or something. Yeah, or as you said, some really difficult triggering things for women who have said like emotionally had trouble writing answer to certain questions because of the way that the subject matter was handled. Yeah, very odd. Florida's just a very interesting it's an interesting exam. I think that's all we can really say.
I got nothing for you folks. Florida is Florida. This is what a strange state. So then we've got Florida multiple choice. And of course, we were nervous about Florida multiple choice because in October, just like confetti blowing up. So they went back to something that looked way more normal, thank goodness. Typically, there are 3 broad categories of questions, over 100 questions, 30 in each subject and 10 that are evaluation questions. And there seemed to be a consensus around 3 subjects of wills, Florida evidence, primarily evidence, and then procedure, which is both civil and criminal procedure. The civil criminal procedure is mandated by the Florida Supreme Court, so it's on every exam. And typically it's about 20 of the 30 questions are civil procedure, 10 are criminal procedure. That seemed to be about what we heard from people. I thought that wills, you just tested trust on the essays. Do you really need to trust wills in multiple choice? But they did. And then evidence, the other possibility would have been business associations. It turned out to be evidence, and that's pretty much what we anticipated on this exam. But I was pleased that we got back to 3 subjects instead of 7 or 8, which is what we had in October. So that was good news, I think, there. So that's what we saw in Florida. Again, results coming out there April 12th, and that was the Florida day of the exam. So there you go.
All right, great. And is there anything else to say about the UBE? I know that we can't share the subject.
I can't go into the subjects, but I'm going to be very coy here. Okay, so we'll just go that way. We do know the subjects, but we are not allowed to share them. But here's what I can tell you: of the 6 essays in the UBE, only 1 was a multi-topic essay. That is 2 subjects, which I really love because I think in a 30-minute essay, 2 subjects is just craziness. And the question that was multi-subject got a lot of comment from people. It had more calls to the question. It was a harder question, I think. The other thing I can tell you is that of the 6 essays, 3 of them were in multi-state subjects. So of the 7 MBE subjects, 3 of those were tested in the essay as well. And then 3 others were in non-multi-state subjects. That is interesting. This 3 or 4 multi-state subjects in the essays, that is a pretty consistent structure. And then, of course, the performance tests are the same ones that were given in Georgia. And so what I said about Georgia applies here. There was an objective task and a persuasive task, memos and briefs. So that's what we can tell you at this point about the UBE. Now, I can also tell you from talking to our students, they were not thrown by this. This was not a surprise to them, other than the one question that seemed to be a bit lengthy. Really, everyone that I talked to, regardless of where they were taking the exam and whether they took it in person or online, because the UBE was given in both formats, seemed okay with it. And the people that took the performance test online, I would say, struggled more than the people that took the performance test in person and then typed their answer into the computer. But outside of that, I didn't see much difference there. And I thought people were generally in pretty good shape. Different result dates, obviously, in different jurisdictions. Some of the early jurisdictions for the UBE will release as early as the first week in April, but it will spread all the way into May before we get all of them covered. So that's the deal there. Unfortunately, we just can't tell you more than that without violating our license, but I hope that gives you a broad sense of the test. So there we go. I want to talk about the multi-state for a minute also, okay, since that obviously impacts all of these different jurisdictions. One of the things that I'm always looking for is how's timing go for people? How much laboring do they have to do to get through the questions? And obviously we talk about this idea of selective intuition, finishing questions in 90 seconds. One of the most striking things to me, we began to see it in the fall, but boy, it really came through clearly to me in February, is that the online jurisdictions that gave 50 questions in 90 minutes was wonderful. Did you get that feedback?
Yes. Yes. People loved it. So breaking it up into 4 sections instead of 2. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Huge difference. A lot of people telling me that they had 90 minutes to do 50 questions. They were finishing in 65 or 70 minutes, able to take a break, get up, pick up coffee. Just, it's a forced pit stop. It gave them a chance to recharge. A lot of people talked about how they really went back and recentered themselves before each of those sections, and they didn't get the fatigue of 100 questions, right, in one sitting. I had a note from a student that I wanted to share with you. She gave me permission to read this. I wanted to share what she wrote about the MBE specifically, because I thought it was really interesting. And it was very reflective of what I heard across the board in all jurisdictions across the country. She said, and I'm quoting here, "The most striking thing for me was how easy every question on the MBE seemed in both the morning and the afternoon session. In the past, I'd struggled with each question, took a long time to get through it." She said there was one time when time was up and I still had 20 questions to go. But this time, she said, it was effortless. First, I went to the call to the question to see what topic we were in. I glanced at the answer choices to see what person we were interested in. Then I read the question slowly and thoroughly, and the answer clearly popped into my head each time. It was like a miracle. And then she says, and this is the part I really wanted to get into, she said, "I really felt good about the overall exam. And I want to thank you guys for helping me change my perspective and change my way of thinking. I took the Abundance for Bar Study Master class. That was a game changer because it helped me in dealing with the stress that affects your neural functioning. It taught me to recognize when my brain synapses were tired and needed to rest. And when I hit that stage, I knew that no amount of continuing to push on would be effective. I knew I had to shut down, allow my brain to rest and heal, both in studying and during the exam." That was awesome. I loved hearing that. And she told me that 90-minute, 4 sections just changed everything for her, because at the end of each section, she just reset. It was like, okay, back in, I'm doing the selective intuition and not getting into that grind mode that's so easy to get into. So I would say that is really good news. I would echo what we were saying earlier. If you're going to be in an online jurisdiction, do the MBE questions online as well in our course. Absolutely makes a difference. And be aware of that timing, right?
Definitely. Yeah, so let's talk about who, as of right now, is going to be online for July. We do anticipate this list will probably grow, but this is as of this morning. So in alphabetical order: California, Connecticut, DC, Illinois, Kentucky, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Tennessee. So I think it was Ohio that announced this morning, their Supreme Court announced this morning that they were going online. If you notice from that, we haven't heard from most of the big jurisdictions other than California. Now, I anticipate there may be a few of those big jurisdictions that will not go online necessarily this time. What are your thoughts?
I would have thought Texas would, and then I saw what Texas decided to do everywhere else. And the problem is it's political now, right? This is not about the bar exam or about good health or good testing. I'm afraid that when I look at what Texas decided to do around masks and requirements, or what Georgia might do, what Florida might do, it is entirely possible that those jurisdictions will go back to in-person exams, even though that strikes me as just short of insane. If you're old like me, you might have gotten both of your vaccination shots. If you're young like Megan and you're at the back of the line, I don't know, maybe by May or June you'd get them, which would be wonderful. And we hope for that, certainly. But I would be very nervous giving a July in-person exam when I know that a lot of my bar takers would be in their early 20s and almost certainly not have been vaccinated. So that to me just seems like you're just asking for trouble. But we'll see. I've believed all along that as California went, most of the other jurisdictions would go. I would expect New York to be online. I think that's a pretty good bet. But I'm a little nervous about Florida and Texas and Georgia.
I think what's interesting, Texas is the one that makes me think most likely they'll be in person because they almost did the last one in person. So if you guys remember, they had 3 sites set up and then they moved to 4 sites set up and then right before they switched to online. But for the other ones, the truth is, I think that giving the online exam was easier for the examiners than having big conference centers full of exam takers for several days. And so I kind of wonder, I think there might be some places where the desire to, maybe for political reasons or otherwise, to have the appearance of we're back in business, we're open, everything's fine, versus the, oh, but actually from a business standpoint, it was nice to saved a lot of money on overhead to have everybody just take it wherever they could. You export a lot of the proctoring to ExamSoft, right? It's a significant time and effort and money saving.
You don't have to take that big Brinks truck up the escalator in the Florida Tampa Convention Center. I don't know how they get it up to the second floor. That's the one where they unload the truck, all the tests. It's like walking the red carpet. Yeah, I think the overhead is huge in some of these states. And once you've let the genie out of the bottle, can you put it back in? That's the question.
Exactly. We've known for a long time that they were going to move to an online type of a test. And so this pushed up their timeline significantly. But I do think it's harder to go backwards once you've done it. And now that they've done it for multiple exams and they keep giving the sort of talk afterwards of how seamless it was and how smooth it went, I think it's really hard to then justify, oh, but we're going to go back to the really expensive. I'm just thinking when I took the bar and I had to get a hotel several nights, and it's a huge ordeal for the takers and for the state bars. So I'm just wondering if bother going back.
I think it's appropriate to talk about the feedback we got from students about those who took the online exam. And I guess before we get there, I should just say, I think states that will go to an online test will have to announce it relatively soon. That you just have to give people enough time to make their travel arrangements if you're going in person and take care of the things they have to do. So I would look for some announcements out of the big states like Florida, Texas, Georgia, some others to come in the next week to 10 days. But I did want to talk a little bit about the logistics and how the online tests work. And one of the things that we did in our debriefs was to ask people how it went. This is my summation of it. There were no systemic failures. There was no complete meltdown of the whole system, which was good news. But there were plenty of individual problems. And most of those problems had to do with getting the right password.
It happened in UBE. I've only heard of it happening in UBE jurisdictions, but in UBE jurisdictions, people did not have an accommodation. So they were sent the non-accommodation password, which was correct. However, in a database, they got flagged as needing an accommodation. So the system locked them out because it was looking for the accommodation password. And since it didn't get the accommodation password, it said wrong password. Let me tell you, so for the July takers, if you cannot get in with the password that they send you, you need to try, of course, calling ExamSoft. But I will tell you that by and large, from everything I saw, those were incredibly long wait times. I don't understand why. I do not understand what in the world they said, oh, we've just tripled our staff and we're prepared. And they were not. They were, again, not prepared to handle calls. So I will tell you, you should get a Twitter account. If you don't have one, make a Twitter account before the bar. It just doesn't even matter what it is. Make a Twitter account. And if you have a problem, ExamSoft was answering people's problems on Twitter immediately. Within minutes, they were responding to people on Twitter and they were getting people what they needed and getting it fixed. So this is like not official. This is not coming from your state bar. This is not coming from ExamSoft, but just as a human being who deals with this world, I am telling you that you should tweet at or direct message ExamSoft, and then they will be able to help you probably quicker than waiting online on hold. I don't know why, but that's what you should do. So
I don't know either. It was very bizarre. And of course, we were getting emails and phone calls and all sorts of things. We couldn't do anything. There wasn't anything that was there for us. I think you got to be rock solid with your internet connections wherever you go. We did have people that said, I went to a friend who had an office, or I went to a friend who let me have their house or their apartment where it was quiet and everything was set up better. And that seemed to work pretty well. I will say the other thing that I heard from people who did have problems is that the examiners were pretty forgiving about letting people start late in a section and complete it with the right amount of time. In other words, if you're in an in-person exam and you get to the test room late, they don't give you extra time. You just lose that time. That is not what happened online. There were people who were on these really long ExamSoft wait lines, phone lines, and got started 20 minutes, 30 minutes later, but apparently were able to get their full allotment of time for that section of the exam and weren't penalized. And we saw that in 2020 as well. The examiners seemed to be pretty reasonable and pretty responsive, even if ExamSoft wasn't. And I guess the last piece I want to say, because I know a lot of you looking at the July exams are nervous, understandably, about online testing. By and large, I would say 75% of the people that we talked to after this exam were enthusiastic about taking the test online. They loved being at home. They loved the convenience. They loved the normalcy of it. They loved being able to go into their own kitchen and make their own meals. They loved having the chair that they usually study in. They loved just everything about it. It just worked better. And for most people, there were no problems. It was smooth. And so if you're nervous about this, I just tell you, if you read the instructions, you do what you're supposed to do, you download the right software and you do the mock tests, the odds are you're going to be just fine. You took the bar 10 years ago, but we were just transitioning to people writing their exams on a computer in the bar exam. And I remember this great tech phobia somewhere in that range of people, I should handwrite versus type. And we said, computers sometimes fail, but by and large, they're pretty successful. And now nobody even thinks about that. You just bring your computer in, whether you're in person or online. I think we're moving in that same direction in online. I think it will be seen as just the way you do the test in a couple of years. And we'll all look back at this quaint time when we were all freaked out about, could we give a test online? So.
Yeah, I think the bar review has been behind the testing curve when it comes to technology. Yeah. In a few ways, but certainly when it comes to technology, other exams have been online fully for a very long time. We're not trailblazers here. The bar exam is not forging any new paths that have never been forged before. It's just new for the bar examiners, which can lead to some interesting problems. But.
Yeah, in my wild fantasies, I think of the Epcot ball, Spaceship Earth. Yeah, if you did Spaceship Earth for the bar exam, we would still be back with the guy chipping away at the rock. Question 1. We've not gotten to Gutenberg and the printing press yet.
And there's a couple of questions in the chat box that I want to talk about. With taking the online performance test, what impact does having paper impact taking the PT?
If you're in a jurisdiction where they let you have scratch paper, I think it's a nice little extra piece just to outline or make your notes. I think it's more challenging when it's all online because then you're dealing with 3 screens, right? You've got the actual package, you've got your note screen, and then you've got your answer screen. And I think it's hard to go, you can copy from your note screen to your answer screen, but you can't copy from the actual document, the question into the note screen. So I think that's hard. I'm an old enough guy that I'd like to have the pencil and paper or the pen and paper if I could do it. What's your thought? I know you.
Yeah, this is very much a whatever you feel comfortable with. For some people, use the scratch paper to jot down quick notes because it's easier for them than typing. Also, if you're a bit more of someone who like spatially, that is helpful for you to be able to write things in different places. It's much easier.
I think what Megan was talking about is the reality that when you've got paper and pencil, you've got a little more opportunity to adjust and move those around. I think what you lose is that then you've got to convert your paper written notes into your document. And it may be better to do that online where you type it in.
And then the other question I said, if you think Florida is going to be adopting the new bar exam, the way the new sort of test that's coming.
The 2024, 25, 26, that one, that's the big question, isn't it? They will have to, or they will drop the MBE entirely because there won't be a multi-state bar exam. So that piece comes to them from the national conference, and that won't exist. When we go to the integrated bar exam, there will no longer be something called the multi-state bar exam. So states like Georgia, Florida, California will have to decide either to jump on board the integrated exam or continue to give their own state-specific test and do away with the national conference multi-state. Florida's got a history of writing their own multiple choice questions. They might decide to go back to something. We might see something that looks like the October 2020 exam, God forbid, but it's certainly a possibility. But it's way too early. None of those states, I think, are going to announce that for a couple of years. If you're in the course today, I think we're going to say to you what we said a couple of weeks ago, which is take the bar exam now. Just get it done while we know what the exam is.
Do you think when the NCBE releases the average for February 2021, will foreshadow passage rates?
We will look at the multi-state rates. Historically, they are lower across the country in February exams than July exams because you have more repeat bar takers. This year, however, I think you got to assume that all bets are off for everything. We had such a bizarre collection of circumstances that led to a very different segments of people taking the exam. I think there'll be very few repeat bar takers in February of 2021 because most of them just didn't have time to prepare. So I think you're going to have a much higher first-time taker number, and that would tend to raise the numbers. But that's the stuff that we geek out on our end. I'm not sure it really should impact any of you at this point.
Hopefully that was helpful for everyone to hear about that. Even if you're a July student, I think it's helpful to hear what's going on, what just happened in this last exam.
Hope everybody has a good study week, that you stay healthy. And for those of you that joined us out of the February exam, take some time off, come and see us again in a few weeks, and we'll be here. And Megan, thank you for being with me. All right, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening and watching the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at celebrationbarreview.com.